Okay, it's time to design. So let's get you set up. We want to make sure you have your vase, have your mechanic already in place. So we did the tape grid, have your scissors or snips available for you. Sometimes having a trash can nearby to kind of scoot off all the stuff we don't need, sometimes that's helpful if you like things more orderly, or you can just make a pile of things that you don't need. I personally like to put my flowers out in front of me and put them in their individual piles. So I have my secondary focal together, my filler, my greenery, they're all kind of in their piles. So that way I can easily grab and I'm not fighting with a bucket of stems that are all tangled. That's my advice. Definitely do what feels best for you, but I feel like when things are laid out really nicely, it's easier to kind of focus on the designing part instead of fiddling with all the things that are getting trapped. Okay, so I always start with greenery first, especially when we're starting out learning to design flowers. One of the things that I want you to keep in mind is that we do not want any leaves below this vessel line. So this is the top of my vase, and I want to make sure that no greenery is going inside this vase that has leaves on it, okay? And that's, again, to help with that bacteria growth. We don't want that there. The other thing that we're going to talk about is breaking the line of the vase. It's really important that we find some element that breaks the line of the vase. And so what I mean by that is the line of the vase is the top. So this top portion right here, we want some element, whether it be a greenery or a flower, to go below this top line. So it lives somewhere down here. Oftentimes that's greenery, or it could be a flower that's sitting low into the design. And the reason we want to do that is if we kind of forget that we have flowers that just kind of exist up top, and then we have all this empty space and it looks unfinished. And so that would be my biggest tip, is to make sure that we find some element that is placed down here. And that means basically sitting it low into the design. So let's start with greenery. So I've got my tape grid, and what I like to think about when I'm placing my greenery is stem length. So and flowers too, but when we're starting out, we're working with the greenery. So when we look at stem length, I'm not going to snip this and put it in like that, because that is a lot of flower in a very small vase. And so when we imagine how tall greenery or flowers should live, it really should be about the vase height on top of this. So imagine this vase sitting on top of itself. It's going to be the tallest flower or greenery is going to be about this tall in the design. That seems pretty tall, but what you want to imagine is if my tallest flower or greenery portion is here, I have all of this space to fill in. So we don't want something super tall, because then we have all this empty space. So again, consider this vase, imagine it's right here. And so sometimes our tallest element is our greenery. Sometimes it's going to be our middle focal flower. So when we think about, okay, we have all this space to fill in, I want my greenery and my flowers to live here. So that's what I'm going to start thinking about, is this empty space. I want you to think kind of strategically at first when you put greenery in place, only because I want there to be unity in the design. I want there to be equal amounts of greenery and roses or filler on all sides of this design. An all-sided design means that we can look at it from any side of the room. So if you plan to put this at an end table and there's just a wall here, then maybe we don't put as much back here. But for the interest of learning how to design, we're going to do a full-sided arrangement. So with this greenery, I probably can use this whole stem. And what I mean by that is I'm going to take the the leaves that are here, I'm going to pull them down just a bit and do a snip right above it. And now I have two pieces of greenery. So I don't want you to see a lot of stem, and so that's why I cut it really close to those leaves so it can hide that stem. Now I have this greenery that's low in the design, which is great because I need to fill in the bottom, I need to fill in the middle. But again, I can't have any leaves that are going to be in this vase. So as I put my stem here, I can see that all of these leaves down have to go. You can individually snip those off if you want to. You can also hold it firmly between your hand and just kind of run your hand down gently and they come off, okay? I have like a pile of stuff. That's where all my greenery things are gonna live that I don't need. And then I'm gonna place this in. So when we think going back to that strategic placement, especially at the beginning, especially when we're learning, I like to envision a compass. So we have north, south, east, and west, right? And then I'm gonna add in another direction, right in the middle. So when we place our greenery, we're gonna start north. And then I want this to be south, okay? And so you can see that those are a little bit different in height, but they're about the same. That's kind of how much I like to do in regard to variance for the first couple of stems. Maybe one's a little lower, one maybe is a little taller. We're gonna do the other sides of the arrangement. So we're going to kind of envision how tall we want it to be. And then we're going to say, okay, I think about this many leaves need to go. So I'm gonna put that there. I'm gonna go back and check my work. And then I'm gonna cut right here at the end of the baseline. So if I put this down, that's how tall that greenery is gonna stick out. So put that in on the other direction. Okay, so we've got almost all of the sides. I'm not sure about this one. So I could use this, but there's not a lot going on here. I could cut it up here, but then I have a really short stem, and if I put that stem in, it's gonna be super short. I think I'm gonna try right above these last set of leaves. I might be able to use that. Yeah, I think I can. So I'm gonna do a fresh cut and put it in. Okay, so that's low. I have two low stems there. I don't love that. So I'm going to rearrange that a little bit. So it's more even. So I have a little bit higher, a little bit lower here, and then I need to do one in the middle. So this one's a little short to go in the middle because remember my highest flower is going to be here, and so I need something that's a little bit taller. If I put that in there, it's not going to reach. And when you think about when you're adding flowers, this is probably going to get completely lost. So I'm just going to keep this to the side. Maybe I can add it later. Okay, this looks nice and long. So I want it to be about this tall. And so I'm going to cut off about that much. You kind of see how I'm placing the stem and kind of eyeballing a little bit about how tall it will be. When you cut stems for length, I want you to think about when you're cooking soup or some kind of meal and we're adding salt, right? They always say only add a little bit and go and taste it and see how it goes. It's kind of the same. Cut a little bit off and see if it's the right length. If it's too tall, you can always cut it back. We can't glue stems back together. We know that, right? So that's kind of the kind of way I want you to kind of capture that and try to get that. So we did north, south, east, and west, and then I also did a greenery in the middle, okay? So that's my strategic plan for you for putting in greenery at first. So, but we have a lot of opportunity for more greenery. So we're gonna do the same thing with the secondary greenery that we have, but we're gonna fill in the spaces that there's nothing there so far. All right. So when we have something that has a lot of stems, I cut off a stem length that I feel would still show up. I really love this greenery because it's floppy. It's gonna just organically flop over that vase line. Remember, we're breaking the line of the vase, so I want that to kind of live low into the design on the outside. So I'm gonna strip all of those leaves off. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about when you are pulling leaves off or you're cutting stems and maybe you're feeling a little frustrated because you're like, well, that looks a lot easier for her and I'm having a hard time. I have done this a little bit longer than you, and I want you to give yourself a little bit of grace that you're learning and you're learning something new. And also that how you feel is super normal, because even as a florist who has done this for a while, I still put things in the vase and I don't like what it looks like or where I placed it. And so I want trial and error to be a normal thing in vase designing or, designing flowers. It's a lot of trial and error. And so just know that that's really normal. Like right now, I'm like, man, is that stem too tall? It might be, but it might be that it's a perfect height once I start adding in the other elements. We want the greenery to poke out. It's not a focal flower. It doesn't have to have its own space in the design, but we definitely want it to have it peek out. So I put the secondary greenery in this empty space. I have a lot of empty space here. I like that there's a little bit more fullness going on here. I think it's going to help aid in having the space be filled up. I decided to stick that particular stem not on the outside of the tape grid and in one of the middle openings, simply because it's very floppy and I want it to stick up, because I want this middle section of the arrangement to be filled in also. I don't want to just concentrate on the outside or the breaking the line of the vase. So this stem I put on the outside opening for the tape grid. This one I kind of put more in the middle because I felt like there was more opportunity to add things there. And so I'm going around filling in the space. A lot of times you'll cut greenery or flowers and you will cut little stems off. If you want to save those for like a bud vase, feel free. You don't have to throw those away. I know sometimes when I teach classes, they're like, oh my gosh, there's all these flowers that we're not going to use. You can use them, just put them in a bud vase. Put them in your bathroom or on your kitchen sink, whatever makes you happy. Use those flowers, you purchased them. So know that we're not throwing that away. Okay, so I'm almost done doing my north, south, east, and west for my secondary greenery. So I cut that, it's a little tall. I feel like that's okay. I do want to make sure that I put some greenery in the middle. So I'm going to pick maybe something like this that has a lot of kind of volume at the top. I'm going to pull all those leaves off as best I can. Maybe you don't have something that is as full as this, that's fine. You can put maybe two stems of greenery in the middle. Again, we're just really trying to fill in this empty space so that the greenery pokes out. I feel like this might be a little too tall. If I put it down, look how tall this is. So I might pull that back a bit. I lost a stem, that's okay. Stems break. And we're just gonna put that in. Okay, it's kind of flopping. I don't love that. Because of how this greenery is, it's a floppier, less sturdy stem, and so it will flop. And so the way that I combat that is I cut it shorter and place it lower into the design, and it flops a lot less. You see how that kind of changed that? This still might be a little tall. It might be that I cut back the top of that right in between those those leaves on the greenery. But right now, I feel like I have a good amount of greenery in place. I can choose to be a little bit more full with my greenery if I want. I have this extra stem I could put in that I feel like I need some more. I could do that. We could put all of this greenery in, but remember, we still need to leave space for all of this. So you want to start with the north, south, east, and west, and in the middle for both greenery sets, but also how much more you add in is really kind of your preference. But I want you to think about, do I have enough space for the rest of the stems for my vase? The smaller your vase, the less room you have. So you want to kind of weigh those two things out. Okay, we're done with the greenery. All right, it's time to add in our focal flowers. So I want you to look back at your vase, look at your greenery. Does it look pretty even? Do we have stems that maybe we feel like are too long? Feel free to adjust that. We can always adjust it later. When we take stems out, a little tip would be to take it and move it back and forth, like wiggle it in between your hand or your fingers and wiggle it out. The more stems you have, the more that technique will be used to simply pull out a flower to reposition it or trim it back or what have you, because they like to get stuck with each other. So just kind of going back and forth between your finger will make that come out a lot easier. Okay, so remember we did the compass with our greenery. We're gonna do that with our focal flowers too. Our tallest flower will be in the middle for the focal flower. Again, think of a vase on top here. So we're gonna probably have it about here. So the rest of the flowers are gonna lay in the middle in regard to height. So when I think about height, I want it to be here. And so when you're designing, you're kind of eyeballing that length and trimming it down on 45-degree angle cut. And then I'm gonna put in my first one, and I feel like that's a good height. It's not too low, it's not too high. And then we're gonna turn and do the other side. Now with these roses, you have the option to make them open up a little more. I wanna show you that technique. So when you have roses, they have those thorns, so you wanna make sure that those are cut away. I have a few that are still hanging out if we didn't take them off when we processed. And we're gonna move this flower stem back and forth between our hands, kind of fast. And basically what we're doing is adding air to kind of fluff open those flower petals. And so they opened up a little bit. You can reflex a rose. Some people are familiar with that. It's really where you're just taking the flower petal and gently moving it. If it gives you any, like it should come down pretty easily like that, and you can flip it out. But let's say it's not wanting to come out and it's really sturdy, you probably want to be either really gentle with that or not reflex that petal. It will tear, and that just means that it's a younger rose and it's not going to come out as well as maybe an older rose would be. The older the rose, the looser the flower petals. And so the flower petals on the outside are older. So that gives you a more fuller look than maybe opposed to this. It's really your style preference. You don't have to have it. You can do a blend of both, which is what I'm gonna choose to do. So I'm gonna cut my stem height about the same as I did on the other side. And then we just kind of move the design around so that way we can equally place these focal flowers in the arrangement. As you get going, you can kind of start eyeballing like the stem height. Placement in the grid, I like to choose either the very outside of the tape grid, so it can lay out a little bit, or you can go one square in and make it be a little bit more into the design. It's really up to you and how you like the way it sits. I like looking at the flowers. Do I like the way that looks? And then fiddling around with it and moving it if the answer is no. All right, so we've gotten those three positions in place. I'm going to do my other side to find one that looks good, and we're gonna put it in. All right, so one of the things that I want you to consider specifically when starting to focus on putting focal flowers in and then the rest of the flowers is insertion point. And so insertion point is basically kind of the way in which you place the flower into the design or into the vessel. So whatever insertion point you choose, you want to make sure that you're doing it the same for every stem for the most part, except for the one that's in the middle. So let me explain that. So I'm choosing to go at an angle with my flower into the design. I'm going to do that for every flower that I have, okay? And except for the one at the top. So my tallest flower, it's a little short. Let's see, that's pretty good. Okay, so except for the one in the middle, I go at an angle for all of my flowers. So the insertion point is the way in which you put a stem into the vessel, and we do it at an angle. The reason that we do that is so that way when we put flowers in at an angle, the same throughout the design, the flowers are going kind of laying in the same direction, if you will. So if you decided not to do that and kind of did all the different insertion points, then you would have stems that would go to the side at one angle, and maybe they go straight up and down, but they're over here. And so they start looking, there's less unity in the design, and they don't lay the right way. And so it starts looking a little funky. And so We have completed for our focal flowers all of the points that we need to do. We did the north, south, east, and west, and then also the sides. And they're equally placed throughout the design. So that is creating unity. I'm placing the flowers in the same angle, and my heights feel good. I'm not too tall in the design, I'm not too low, and I've broken the line of the vase with my greenery. And so I feel pretty good about the placement of all of these. So that's kind of our basic starting point for this arrangement. The next thing that I like to add are my secondary focal. So what I love to do with those is put those in all of the empty spaces that are available to me. So that means empty spaces between the focal flowers. Remember when we put the greenery in and we did the greenery, the first greenery, and then the second greenery we put in the spaces in between? That's similar to these flowers here. So when I think about height, I know that I need to fill in space here, I need to fill in space here, and throughout the whole design. But I have filler flowers, and I have form flowers, and I have line flowers. So I have a lot of options to choose from. So I'm gonna try to pick basically the same height for these secondary focals. And one of the things that I want you to try to avoid is creating a line and with the flower. So that if I had a pencil and I drew a line, that would be pretty straight. And the way that we break that is either making it shorter and lower into the design, or angling it out. So it's angled out into the design and sitting lower. So I'm gonna pick sitting lower in the design. And so I can't quite create a line with that. It's more like a V shape almost, instead of it being straight across. And so I like doing that because it will make sure that there aren't harsh shapes and lines in the design. So I'm gonna do that for the rest moving forward. So I'm gonna get any greenery that may be in the way and adding those blooms in the design. I'm going to choose to do this the same on every side, and that is really to create unity. And so I cut that stem too long, I wiggle it out, and then I cut it down, and I place it into the design. If you put stems in, it's like, oh, that's not going in, then you pull it out and find another place for it to go into. And what you'll find is that maybe it's not at the right angle, and if that angle is not quite right, then you cut that stem down and try again, because a lot of times when you have flower stems that are on top of each other like that, that space for it to stay and be held is not as deep as maybe the first stems were. And so feel free to cut that stem a little lower so that way it can fit in that space a little bit better. All right, so I am finishing out my design with my secondary focals, okay? You can add as many as you want. I can go more and put the rest of these in there if I want, or I can go back and add my other flowers next. I'm gonna just stop there and start with my filler flowers next and see how I feel about it and add more if I need to. Okay, so we are making a lot of good progress with our design so far. I'm gonna start with the filler next, and I'm gonna teach you a little bit how to work with filler. So especially with filler flowers, they have stems that go all the way down almost. We're not gonna use those because if we put them in, for the starters, it's gonna be way too busy, too full. And then also, we probably won't see a lot of these blooms because they'll be too tucked down into the design. And so you can decide how you want to pull these off. You can use your scissors to trim them off individually. You can pull them. Remember those bud vases, you can use them again. I'm gonna strip this down so it's not so busy. Cut out any stems that don't look good or any petals that are smushed or what have you. And then I'm going to put this in the spaces that are empty. I want to fill in this middle part here, or maybe down in the design that's lower. So we're going to look at those spaces and cut it down. So figure out your height that you want to cut it at, eyeball it, sit it down into the design. When you use a filler flower, you don't want to have a filler flower that's really sitting above that focal flower. You want it below those flowers. And the reason is because filler flowers are filling in the spaces within the design, not on top of the design. So if you ever see it kind of sitting up tall like that, for a filler flower specifically, it's going to look a little out of the ordinary. It's not going to be what you traditionally see. So I want you to make sure those filler flowers are going low into the design. So I'm going to cut that down. And there we go. So we're filling in those spaces. It's looking a little bit better. We've got a little bit more to work with here. Okay. All right, so with your filler flowers, just fill in those spaces. You're more than welcome to use some of these taller stems if you want and fill in the bottom. I will warn you though, they don't have long stems, and so if they can't reach the water very well, they will die off sooner than the rest. So if that doesn't work for you and you don't have a longer stem, maybe like this one, that I could just place in like this, then you want to make sure that you just save that one for the bud vase. But if it has a long stem, feel free to use it again. That's definitely a really good use of that flower. Okay, so now we're going to add in our line and form flowers. So with our line and form flowers, they are going to be really fun to add in. There's a little bit of technique that comes with it, so I want to share that with you. So the line flowers are going to be ones that stick up out of the design top a little bit. I like to add line and form flowers in odd numbers. So think about 3, 5, 7, 9. Think about those in larger designs. So the larger the design, the more that we're going to add. But with smaller designs, I'm adding 3 to 5. And so when I cut the length of the stem, I'm going to think about, I want this line flower to be shown. Remember, we're helping it. This line flower helps create movement in the design. It carries my eye to one side to the other. When I am putting in a line flower, I want to not create bunny ears where I'm just adding 2. So that's another reason for the 3s or the 5s or the 7s. And then I also like to add them in a triangular shape, meaning the points, so the top and the 2 bottoms. So if I look down into the design, I'm adding them with those 3 points in mind. I'm adding them at that angled way, the way that we add all of our design, or excuse me, our flowers. And I'm adding them in so that way they're not sitting straight up and down, and I am letting them fill in some of those empty spaces that we have. One of the things that you'll run into as you design is, especially at the end of your design, is there are a lot of stems in here, and you'll find that it's hard to put the additional stems in, and that can create some frustration. So the way that you do that is just cut down that stem, and basically the stems that are in there, they're creating a space for that stem to live, but it doesn't have to go down as far. So that's why it's okay to cut that down. If your flowers move throughout, just kind of wiggle them around and make sure that you like the placement of your line flowers. Sometimes I find if I put them in, they'll get too close together if I'm trying to do that triangular pattern. And so I just kind of fiddle with it to make sure that they're sticking out just a little bit and they are uniformly placed, so that way we don't have this big open space over here. The same thing goes for our form flowers. I like to use those odd numbers again. I really love these freesia. They smell so good, and I'm gonna add those in so that way they can be seen. I have 2 different methods. I would sit them in low into the design so that way they're flush with everything else. But I also, this particular flower wants to turn. But I also have the ability to let them float a little bit over the design because of their size, or excuse me, their shape and their size. They have a little bit of wiggle room in how tall or low they sit into the design. With our filler flowers, they sit lower into the design. They don't stick out. but with the form flowers, they have the ability to go up or a little bit lower. I really decide that based on what my kind of opening in my design looks like. There's a lot of space here. Maybe I want to put that lower or lower into the design. So I'm gonna take one of my smaller ones and put that low into the design. Okay, so add those in 3, 5, 7s and kind of do that triangular pattern, fill in the spaces. Form flowers can sit a little bit above, a little bit into the design, and that will kind of create that unity and that interest that you're looking for. All right, so as I'm designing my flowers, we're towards the end. We've added in all of the elements. We've done the focal flowers, the secondary focal, the filler, the form flowers, and the line flowers. But I look around and I see a lot of empty spaces. There are empty spaces still with all those elements in place. So what I choose is I'm gonna go back and take my secondary focal and fill in those spaces. I have 3 more left, and so I have those odd numbers working with me. So I'm gonna look at the design and figure out where I have a hole, where I can put a more round, fuller flower and fill in that space. And that way my line and focal, or excuse me, my line and form flower aren't doing all that work. We just get to use those and see those as another thing that's beautiful and adds interest, where these flowers that are more full can do kind of that heavy lifting and fill in those empty spaces. And so you can choose to go back and add in more of the greenery, or maybe you decide that you want more roses instead, because those are your favorite parts. The bigger your flower, the easier it is to utilize that to fill in space, and it makes it really fun to go back into your flowers and pull out more. I really love these freesia, so instead of just having 3, I'm gonna choose to have a few more in mine because they're not a flower that is available often. When I add in more though, I wanna make sure that I don't pair them with one that's already there. I want to kind of spread it around. I don't want one of them to feel more heavy than the other. So I'm gonna look and say, where can I add this that would not seem too full? But see, I'm deciding to let that float outside of the design. That's where form flowers can be really fun because they have that versatility. Again, remember, you can cut down stems as you get lower, or excuse me, further into the design. We have more stems that are there holding our flowers in, and so we don't need as much stem length for those. And so as you look around, maybe you want another bit of greenery sticking out. Maybe at the bottom there are empty spaces that need more greenery or another focal flower. But again, be mindful of when you add focal flowers or secondary focal that we're adding flowers in a way that doesn't overwhelm the design or take away from the focal unity that we've put in place. Having 2 flowers together is very interesting, but we don't want to overpower it throughout the rest of the design. So kind of be mindful or thoughtful of that. Try not to create too many straight lines. And also, don't stress about it too, just fiddle with it, look at it, see, does that look good? Do I like that? I think I added that in my compass design. I think I did that the way I was told that it makes sense to do it in. So you just kind of see what looks good to you. The goal here is that it's kind of equal around each side, and we have things kind of doing their jobs the way that they are intended to be used, and we don't have any holes that we can see our mechanics, and it looks really great. So hopefully you have something really beautiful in front of you that you're proud of, and if this was a little hard for you, keep trying. Do it on a smaller scale. If you found this to be easy, go do a bigger vase design and see what it looks like when you have more space to fill. But these are the basic elements that you can follow, and it's usually foolproof. Like, we can definitely work through this and make something beautiful, and mistakes happen and it's okay. It's just one of those beautiful ways to learn and be creative and empower you to do something maybe that you didn't feel as good about before. I hope you had the best time and that you created something lovely.